Millionaire thought he was wedding an ugly woman in arranged marriage, but he was shocked when she... Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The rain beat down against the glass walls of the chapel like 1,000 tiny whispers. Inside, everything looked perfect: white lilies, gold-trimmed chairs, and a crowd of guests dressed to impress. But for Alexander Reed, the billionaire CEO of Reed Holdings, it all felt like a cruel joke. He stood at the altar, face carved in cold marble, signing the marriage contract with a pen that cost more than most people's yearly rent. His father's voice echoed in his mind. Marry her, or the board will strip you of your inheritance. He didn't even bother to look up as the bride walked in. The rumors had already poisoned his thoughts that she was plain, quiet, maybe even unattractive, a woman chosen not for love but for family alliance. Alexander didn't care. Love was for fools. Power was real. The music swelled, and the bride stepped closer, her face hidden beneath a delicate ivory veil. Her hands trembled as she reached the altar. For a split second, Alexander caught the faint scent of lavender and rain. It startled him, too gentle for someone he had already dismissed. Do you, Alexander Reed, take this woman? The priest's voice droned on. I do, he said flatly. When it was her turn, her voice was soft, careful, almost musical. I do. The words felt heavier than they should. A flashbulb popped from a photographer, and in that blinding light, he thought he saw something grace. Maybe it was just the reflection, maybe the candlelight. Either way, he ignored it. Minutes later, the ceremony was over. The guests clapped. Contracts exchanged hands. A transaction sealed. As they left the chapel, Alexander's assistant leaned in, whispering, Sir, the press is waiting outside. Should I? Handle it. Alexander cut him off, adjusting his cufflinks. He didn't notice his new wife pause by the door, whispering to an older woman clutching a worn handbag, her mother, hidden in the crowd. It's done, Mama, she murmured, her voice trembling. You can get your treatment now. The older woman squeezed her hand. You did the right thing, my love. When Alexander finally turned to her, the bride straightened, hiding her emotions behind a calm mask. Shall we go? He asked. She nodded, silent. The limousine door shut with a soft click, sealing two strangers inside. The city lights blurred past the tinted glass as neither spoke. The only sound was the rain. In the reflection, Alexander caught her profile small, delicate, the veil still covering her face. You can take that off, he said, his tone distant. Slowly, she lifted the veil. For the briefest moment he froze. She wasn't what he expected at all. Not hideous, not dazzling, just human. Tired eyes, a faint scar near her jawline, lips pressed together like someone who had learned to endure more than she should. He looked away quickly. We'll keep things simple, he said. You'll stay at the estate. We'll live our own lives. This arrangement benefits us both. She nodded. I understand. Outside, lightning flashed over the skyline, a thin crack of light in the dark. Inside the car, an uneasy silence settled two souls bound by paper, separated by pride. And yet, beneath all that indifference, something unspoken flickered, the faint beginning of a storm neither of them could yet see. The next morning, the estate felt colder than usual. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors, bouncing off glass chandeliers that sparkled like frozen stars. Elena woke in a guest bedroom far too grand for her, the sheets soft as clouds, the silence almost suffocating. Her reflection in the mirror startled her. The faint scar near her jawline caught the morning light, a quiet reminder of all the things people never bothered to understand. She adjusted her scarf, whispered to herself, You made a promise. Do not break now. In another wing of the mansion, Alexander Reed was already dressed for work. Crisp gray suit, black tie, polished shoes that echoed with authority as he descended the grand staircase. The staff greeted him with stiff politeness. Good morning, sir. He nodded but did not respond. When his assistant, Marcus, handed him a stack of files, Alexander said flatly, Move the board meeting to 3. I do not want interruptions. Marcus hesitated, glancing at the breakfast table where Elena sat quietly, a cup of coffee untouched in front of her. What about your wife? sir. Should I inform the press she will not attend the charity gala tonight? Alexander paused, eyes flicking toward her. No need. It is a business event. She has no reason to be there. Elena looked up briefly, meeting his gaze. For a heartbeat, something flickered in her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, but she hid it quickly behind a polite smile. That is fine, Mr. Reed. I have work to do around the house. He left without another word. The door shut, and the silence returned, heavy and unkind. Hours passed. Elena explored the empty mansion, her footsteps echoing through hallways lined with paintings worth more than her entire life savings. In the garden, she found the roses wilted, vines overgrown, fountains dry. Without asking permission, she tied her hair back and began trimming, cleaning, restoring small corners of life. The gardener, an older man named Robert, approached her cautiously. "Ma'am, you do not have to, please," she interrupted softly. "I like doing this. It helps me think." By afternoon, the garden looked different, less sterile, more alive. The scent of earth and grass lingered on her hands. When she walked back inside, the staff looked at her with quiet curiosity. They had expected a spoiled wife, not someone who worked beside them. That evening, Alexander returned earlier than usual. As he walked through the foyer, he noticed something strange. The faint fragrance of lavender mixed with fresh soil drifted through the air. The garden outside the tall windows glowed softly under the setting sun. Alive again. He frowned, surprised. "Who told the staff to do that?" Robert cleared his throat nervously. "It was Mrs. Reed, sir." Alexander turned toward the staircase just as Elena appeared, her hands slightly dirty, a few strands of hair loose around her face. She looked nothing like the timid bride from the night before. "You worked out there?" he asked, unable to hide the confusion in his voice. "Yes," she said simply. "I used to help my mother with her garden. It felt wrong to let everything here die." For a moment, he had no reply. She brushed past him gently, heading toward the hallway, and her scent lingered, a subtle reminder that she was not the person he thought she was. Later that night, Alexander stood in his study, gazing at the garden from the window. The moonlight shimmered across the revived roses. His chest tightened with something unfamiliar. Respect, maybe. Curiosity. He did not understand it, so he dismissed it. But deep down, a question started to form: who exactly was the woman he had married? Meanwhile, Elena sat alone in her room, writing a letter to her mother. "Mama, the house is beautiful but cold. The man I married does not see me yet, but that is all right. I did not come here for love. I came here for your life." Her pen paused. She looked out the window at the same moon Alexander was staring at from across the mansion. Somewhere between them, a distance began to shrink, not through words, but through the quiet acts neither realized the other had already noticed. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of the mansion settled into a strange, silent balance. Alexander buried himself in work, while Elena kept her quiet distance, moving like a soft presence that the staff had begun to respect. She spent her mornings in the garden, her afternoons in the library, and her evenings helping Robert and the maids with dinner preparations. The rumors about her being spoiled or unkind slowly disappeared within the household walls. One afternoon, Alexander returned home earlier than usual. His board meeting had ended abruptly after a heated argument about the company's new project. His mind buzzed with frustration as he walked through the door, loosening his tie. From the kitchen came the faint sound of laughter. Curious, he followed the sound and stopped at the doorway. There she was, sleeves rolled up, a smudge of flour on her cheek, laughing softly with the cook as they tried to knead dough that refused to cooperate. It was the first time he had seen her laugh. For a moment, he stood there silently, unsure why the sight disarmed him. She noticed him finally and froze. "Mr. Reed," she said quickly, brushing her hands on a towel, "I am sorry. I did not hear you come in." He blinked, caught off guard by how natural it felt to see her there. "It is fine," he said, his tone less cold than usual. "I did not expect to find you baking," she smiled faintly. "I am not very good at it, but the staff has been kind to teach me. It makes the house feel less empty." He nodded, not trusting himself to say more, and turned away. But something about the smell of fresh bread followed him up the stairs like a ghost of warmth he had forgotten existed. That night dinner was served later than usual. The loaf she baked sat at the center of the table, slightly uneven but golden and fragrant. Alexander hesitated before taking a piece. It was imperfect but somehow comforting. "It is good," he said quietly. Elena looked up in surprise. "Thank you." The small exchange lingered longer than either expected. Over the next few days, small things began to change. Alexander started noticing details he had ignored before: the way Elena hummed softly while she worked in the garden, the way the staff smiled more around her, the faint light she brought into corners that had long been lifeless. One evening, as he passed the open doors of the study, he saw her standing by the piano. Her fingers brushed lightly over the keys before pressing one, then another. "You play?" he asked from the doorway. She turned, startled. "A little," she admitted. "My father taught me before he passed away. I have not played in years." He stepped closer, curiosity overriding his usual distance. "Then play something." She hesitated but obeyed. The soft melody filled the room, simple but haunting, echoing through the high ceilings. Alexander stood still, listening, the sound touching a place he had buried long ago. When the final note faded, she looked up at him shyly. "I am sorry if I was too loud." "No," he said after a pause, his voice lower, almost gentle. "It was perfect." Their eyes met for the first time without walls between them, and the air shifted, heavy with something unspoken. The next morning, Elena received a phone call that changed her expression completely. She rushed to pack her bag. Robert found her in the hallway, pale and trembling. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" She nodded weakly. "My mother," she collapsed. "The hospital called." When Alexander returned home that evening, the house felt wrong, empty. Robert handed him the note she had left on the kitchen counter. It read simply, "I will be back soon. Please tell Mr. Reed I am grateful for everything." For the first time in years, Alexander felt something unfamiliar, a quiet ache in his chest. He stood by the window, looking out at the garden she had revived, and realized how different the house felt without her. It was as if the air itself had lost its warmth. In that stillness, he understood one thing clearly. Somewhere between obligation and indifference, she had become more than he had ever intended her to be. 2 days passed before Alexander heard anything. The absence of Elena hung over the mansion like a cloud, turning every hallway back into the lifeless shell it used to be. He went through the motions: meetings, calls, dinners alone, but something in him had shifted, though he refused to admit it. On the third morning, his assistant Marcus entered the office with a hesitant look. "Sir, Mrs. Reed called the main line. She is still at the hospital. Her mother's condition is critical." Alexander looked up from his laptop, the words catching him off guard. "What hospital?" Marcus named it, and within an hour, Alexander was behind the wheel of his black car, speeding through the city rain. When he arrived, the fluorescent lights and the sterile smell hit him. In a small room near the end of the corridor, Elena sat by her mother's bedside, holding her hand, her hair slightly disheveled, eyes red from exhaustion. She looked up, startled to see him standing in the doorway. "Mr. Reed, what are you doing here?" she asked quietly. He hesitated, then said, "You should have called. You should not face this alone." She gave a faint smile. "I have been alone for most of my life, Alexander. It is nothing new." Something in the way she said his name, soft but firm, stirred him. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "What does the doctor say?" "They are trying to stabilize her," she whispered. "The treatments are expensive, but I will find a way." I promised her I would not give up. Without a word, he pulled out his phone and made a call. Within minutes, arrangements were being made for private care, all costs covered under his account. Elena's eyes widened. "You cannot do that. I did not marry you for charity." "I know," he said simply, "but you are my wife, even if it began as a contract." For the first time, her composure cracked. Tears welled up, but she turned away, ashamed to let him see. He reached out, almost instinctively, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It is all right," he said quietly. "Let me help." That night, he sat with her in silence as machines hummed and the clock ticked past midnight. It was the first time they shared quiet without walls. When the doctor finally said her mother was stable, Elena exhaled, relief trembling in her breath. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved her." Alexander shook his head. "No, you did. I only made a few calls." He left before dawn, but something about her stayed with him, the way she refused to surrender even when the world demanded it. Over the next week, Alexander began visiting the hospital every evening after work. Sometimes he brought flowers for her mother, sometimes coffee for Elena. The nurses started whispering, surprised that the stoic businessman always appeared at the same hour, waiting outside quietly, until Elena waved him in. One evening, she caught him standing by the vending machine, staring at a photograph on the wall, a charity campaign featuring the very hospital they were in. "You do a lot for people," she said softly, walking up beside him. He shook his head. "Not enough. My father built the company to look strong, not kind. I am trying to change that." She studied him for a moment. "Maybe you already are." Their eyes met, and this time neither looked away. Later that night, as he drove her home, the city lights blurred against the windshield. She leaned her head against the window, whispering, "I never thought kindness could be so quiet." He glanced at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. Maybe it does not need to be loud to matter. When they arrived at the mansion, he opened her door, and for the first time she smiled without hesitation. "Good night, Alexander." "Good night, Elena," he replied softly, watching her walk toward the door. For once, he did not feel like the man who signed a contract. He felt like someone learning how to care. The following week brought an invitation Alexander could not ignore. The annual Reed Holdings Charity Gala, hosted at the company's downtown hotel, was the biggest social event of the year. Every executive, shareholder, and reporter would be there. Normally, he faced these nights with perfect composure, but this time something was different. He kept glancing at the empty seat beside him in the car, wondering if Elena would agree to go. When he finally asked her that morning, she hesitated. "Are you sure you want me there?" "People talk, Alexander, they always do." He looked up from his coffee and said calmly, "Let them. You are my wife. That is enough." She held his gaze for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but I do not have anything to wear for something like that." A faint smile touched his lips. "Then we will fix that." That afternoon, a designer arrived at the mansion with racks of gowns and boxes of shoes. Elena resisted at first, feeling out of place among the glitter and silk, but the staff encouraged her. When she finally stepped out of her room hours later, the entire hallway fell silent. The dress was elegant but simple, a deep navy that matched her eyes, the fabric flowing like water with every movement. The faint scar on her cheek was barely visible under soft makeup. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel beautiful without apology. That evening, the grand ballroom shimmered under a canopy of chandeliers. Cameras flashed as Alexander entered with Elena on his arm. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Is that her? The quiet wife he never shows? She is nothing like I imagined." Alexander ignored the voices, but inside he felt an unfamiliar pride. Elena moved with quiet grace, greeting people with polite smiles, her voice calm and steady. When he introduced her to the board members, she spoke thoughtfully about the hospital and charity work, surprising them with her insight. Even Marcus, standing nearby, whispered, "She is incredible, sir." As the night went on, Alexander found himself watching her more than anyone else. The way she laughed softly at a joke, the way her hand rested lightly on his arm, it felt natural, as if this had always been their place. During the dinner, a woman approached their table, tall, elegant, and cold-eyed. It was Victoria, Alexander's former girlfriend and a shareholder in the company. She smiled, but her tone was sharp. "Alexander, you have been hiding your wife from us. How interesting." She turned to Elena, her gaze condescending. "You are quite brave, dear, stepping into this world." Elena met her eyes calmly. "I did not step into it," she said quietly. "I was invited." The guests nearby chuckled, and Victoria's smile faltered. Alexander tried to suppress a smirk but failed. After Victoria walked away, he leaned toward Elena and murmured, "You handled that better than most people in this room." She shrugged lightly. "I have dealt with worse." Hours later, as the final toast was made, and the orchestra played a slow waltz, Alexander extended his hand toward her. "Dance with me?" She hesitated. "You do not dance. Maybe tonight I will." They moved on to the floor, the world blurring into soft music and golden light. For a moment, it felt like the rest of the world disappeared. "Why are you looking at me like that?" she whispered. "Because I am wondering how I never noticed you before," he said honestly. Her lips parted, but no words came. The song ended, applause echoed, and they stepped apart slowly, reluctant to break the spell. As the night wound down, photographers captured one final image, Alexander and Elena standing side by side under the chandelier, his hand resting protectively at her back. That photograph would appear in the papers the next morning with headlines calling her the mysterious Mrs. Reed. Neither of them cared about the headlines. For the first time since their marriage, it no longer felt like a contract. It felt like the beginning of something real. The morning after the gala, the headlines were everywhere. Photographs of Alexander and Elena filled the society pages, the two of them standing beneath the chandeliers like a couple straight out of a dream. "The mysterious Mrs. Reed steals the spotlight," one article read. The coverage was overwhelmingly positive, but not everyone celebrated it. At the Reed Holdings headquarters, Victoria sat in her glass-walled office, her smile sharp as glass. She had once been certain Alexander would marry her. Seeing Elena calm, graceful, and unexpectedly adored ignited something bitter inside her. By noon, whispers had begun circulating among the shareholders that Elena was a fraud, that she had married Alexander to access his fortune, that her past was not as clean as she claimed. When Alexander's assistant Marcus rushed into his office, holding a printed report, his voice was tense. "Sir, someone leaked old photographs and documents suggesting Mrs. Reed was involved in debt collections years ago. They are spreading online." Alexander frowned, his jaw tightening. "That is impossible. She worked part-time jobs, not schemes. Who is behind it?" Marcus hesitated. "It looks like Victoria's team." Without another word, Alexander stood, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. At home, Elena was unaware of the growing storm until her phone buzzed with messages. Headlines screamed lies about her. "Gold digger," one caption read. "From waitress to millionaire's wife overnight." She dropped the phone, her hands trembling. When Alexander arrived, she was standing by the window, eyes red, staring out at the garden she had brought back to life. "Is it true?" she asked quietly without turning around. "Are they saying I married you for money?" He stepped closer, his voice steady but low. "Do not read any of it. None of it matters." She turned, her expression a mix of hurt and disbelief. "It matters when the world calls me something I am not. You do not even deny it publicly." He hesitated. "I will handle it." "When?" she asked sharply. "After everyone believes them?" Her voice cracked, raw emotion breaking through her usual calm. "I thought you knew me better than that." Before he could answer, she pulled off her wedding ring and set it on the table. "Maybe this arrangement has run its course." She walked past him, tears streaming down her face, and by the time the front door closed, Alexander was left staring at the ring, realizing too late that his silence had cost him her trust. Days passed, and the house grew cold again. He tried to focus on work, but her absence lingered like a missing heartbeat. Then Marcus entered his office one evening, holding a folder. "Sir, I found something. The bank records and witness statements, they are forged. Someone paid a journalist to create those stories." "Victoria," Alexander said under his breath, "get the proof. Every email, every transaction." The next day, at a major press conference, Alexander stood before the cameras. The crowd buzzed, waiting for him to speak. "There have been false accusations about my wife," he began, his voice calm but cutting. "The woman you have judged has done more for this company and this community than most of you ever will. The lies end today." He held up the documents exposing the fabrication, every camera flashing. "And to the one responsible, consider this your last day associated with Reed Holdings." By that evening, Victoria's name was removed from the company's website, and Alexander finally felt the weight of his choices crash down on him. He drove for hours through the city, searching until he found her. Elena was volunteering at the same hospital that had once treated her mother, helping distribute meals to families in need. When she saw him at the doorway, her eyes widened. "Why are you here?" He took a breath. "To fix what I broke." He reached into his pocket and held up the ring. "You once said kindness did not need to be loud. I should have defended you sooner. I am sorry." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped closer, her eyes softening. "You really are terrible at saying sorry." He smiled faintly. "Then let me keep trying." The faint sound of laughter and clinking dishes filled the air as she took the ring, not putting it on yet, but not refusing either. For the first time in weeks, the silence between them felt like peace instead of distance. Elena did not return home that night. Even after accepting his apology, she told Alexander she needed time to think, so he respected that, though the mansion felt emptier than ever. For the first time in his life, Alexander Reed felt powerless, not in the boardroom, not in business, but in love. Days passed slowly. He sent flowers to the hospital where she worked, not extravagant bouquets but simple lilies, her favorite. He wrote letters he never sent, words like "I miss you" and "come home" that stayed locked in his desk drawer. Meanwhile, Elena focused on her volunteer work, helping the hospital's foundation rebuild its children's wing. She poured herself into every detail, grateful for the distraction but unable to stop thinking about him. One evening, as she was preparing donation reports, she overheard two nurses whispering near the window. "Did you hear about Mr. Reed's announcement?" one said. "He donated $5 million to fund free medical care for underprivileged families." He said it was inspired by his wife. Elena froze, her heart thudding softly. She turned to the television in the waiting area where a live press briefing played. Alexander stood before a crowd of reporters, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "Kindness is not weakness," he said. "It is strength, and I have learned that from my wife, Elena Reed." She watched in silence, tears welling up. It was not the money that touched her, it was the humility, the way he said her name with pride. The next morning she returned to the mansion quietly, uncertain how he would react. The doors opened before she could knock. Marcus, smiling faintly, said, "He has been waiting for you." Alexander was in the garden, the same one she had once revived with her bare hands. He was kneeling by the rose bushes, trimming them carefully, his suit jacket discarded beside him. When he looked up and saw her standing there, his breath caught. "You are back," he said softly. "For now," she replied, though her lips curved into a small smile. He stood, brushing soil from his hands. "I did not expect you to come back so soon." "I saw what you did," she said, "for the hospital, for me." He shook his head. "I did it because it was right, not because of guilt." She stepped closer. "You still do not know how to accept gratitude, do you?" He chuckled under his breath. "Maybe you can teach me." They walked slowly through the garden, the evening light painting gold across the leaves. "When I first came here," she said quietly, "I felt like a guest in your world, but somewhere along the way it started to feel like mine too." Alexander stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "It is yours," he said simply. "Every part of it. If you will have it and me with no contracts, no conditions." She looked up at him, searching his eyes for any trace of hesitation, but there was none. "You really mean that?" "More than anything," he answered. A faint breeze stirred between them, carrying the scent of roses and lavender. For the first time, she reached out and took his hand willingly. "Then maybe we can start over," she whispered. "No signatures, no rules. Just us," he said. The moment lingered, quiet and real. Later that night, as they sat together by the fireplace, Elena turned to him and asked, "What made you change, Alexander?" He thought for a moment before replying. "You did. You made me see that wealth means nothing if it cannot buy peace of heart." She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then I guess we are both learning." Outside, rain began to fall softly, the same kind of rain that had once echoed through their wedding day. But this time, it did not sound cold or lonely. It sounded like a beginning. In that quiet warmth, Alexander realized he was no longer the man who had signed a contract. He was the man who had found his reason to love. Weeks later, the world around them seemed to breathe differently. The mansion no longer felt cold. Sunlight filled the hallways again, and laughter returned to corners that had once known only silence. Alexander and Elena found a rhythm that felt natural: morning coffee together, quiet evenings in the garden, and weekends visiting the hospital to oversee the children's wing project. Yet even as life settled into peace, the past was not done testing them. One morning, Marcus rushed into Alexander's office holding a folder. "Sir, there is an emergency," he said, breathless. "The shareholders are calling for an immediate meeting. They claim your recent donations and personal decisions have cost the company millions." Alexander closed his laptop slowly, his calm expression betraying nothing. "Let them call it. I will face them." That evening, the boardroom buzzed with tension. Dozens of executives sat around the long mahogany table, whispering behind their hands as Alexander entered. At the head of the table, Mr. Caldwell, an older shareholder known for his greed, stood and said sharply, "We are here because you have forgotten your duties, Alexander. This company is not your charity. You have weakened our profits for emotional reasons." Alexander straightened, his voice steady. "No, I have strengthened it through integrity. If all we do is chase numbers, then we are no better than machines." Caldwell sneered, spoken like a man distracted by his wife. Murmurs filled the room. Alexander's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, the doors opened. Elena stepped in, wearing a simple dress, her eyes calm but fierce. If you believe kindness is weakness, she said, her voice echoing in the silence, then you have never seen how it saves lives. The room went still. She continued, because of what you call wasted funds, hundreds of families can afford medical care. Because of your CEO's decisions, this company is respected not just for its wealth, but for its humanity. That is real strength. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, one of the younger executives stood. She is right, he said quietly. Public trust has never been higher. Our sales increased after the hospital partnership. Others nodded in agreement. Caldwell's glare faded as realization spread across the table. Alexander turned to Elena, his eyes soft but proud. Thank you, he whispered. She smiled faintly. I told you, kindness does not have to be loud. When the meeting ended, applause broke out, not for profits but for principle. Outside, as they walked toward the car, Alexander reached for her hand. You did not have to defend me in there, he said. She looked up at him. I was not defending you. I was defending us. The words lingered between them like a promise. That night, Alexander arranged something special. He told her to dress warmly, then drove her to the very rooftop where he had once stood alone during his darkest business days. The city lights spread beneath them, endless and bright. Do you remember the night of our wedding? He asked. She laughed softly. How could I forget? You barely looked at me. And I was a fool for it, he admitted. Because if I had looked, I might have seen the woman who would change everything. He took her hand gently. I used to think success meant control. Now I know it means choosing the right person to build a life with. She blinked back tears. You really have changed. No, he said, smiling. You changed me. Then, from his pocket, he pulled something small and familiar, the same wedding ring she had once left on the table. You never had to earn this, he said, but I hope you will choose it now, freely. Her eyes glistened as she took it, sliding the ring back onto her finger. It feels right this time, she whispered. Because this time, he said softly, it means love. The wind carried their laughter across the rooftop as the city lights shimmered below. For the first time, their story did not feel like an arrangement, it felt like a choice. Months passed, and the seasons shifted softly over the Reed estate. The garden Elena once revived bloomed brighter than ever, a quiet symbol of how far they had come. Life had changed not through grand gestures, but through the small, steady rhythm of love. Mornings were filled with laughter echoing down the hallways, and evenings were shared over candlelight dinners that needed no guests, no performances, just them. One sunny afternoon, the hospital foundation held a grand opening ceremony for the new children's wing fully funded by the Reed Foundation. The media was there, along with doctors, families, and children whose lives would be changed. Elena stood on the stage beside Alexander, her hand resting gently on his arm. This place was built because of your kindness, she told the audience, her voice warm but steady. But more than that, it was built on hope, the belief that second chances exist for all of us, even when we think we do not deserve them. The crowd applauded as Alexander leaned toward her and whispered, You were never my second chance, Elena. You were my first right decision. She smiled, her eyes shining, and squeezed his hand in return. Later that evening, back at the mansion, the two of them walked through the garden under strings of soft lights that Marcus and the staff had hung for the celebration. Robert, the old gardener, stood at a distance, smiling quietly as he watched them. You did good, ma'am, he said, tipping his hat before heading inside. Alexander turned to her, a playful glint in his eyes. You know, we never had a real wedding reception, just a courtroom, a contract, and a lot of rain. She laughed. That rain was the soundtrack to our mistakes. Then tonight, he said, stepping closer, let us make new memories to replace them. Soft music began to play from somewhere. One of the staff had turned on a small speaker. Elena blinked, surprised. You planned this? Maybe, he said, smiling. Dance with me? She nodded, and as they swayed under the lights, the world felt quiet and complete. Do you ever think about how it all started? She asked. Every day, he replied, and I would not change a thing, because every wrong step led me to you. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time it was not from pain, it was from peace. The night deepened, stars scattered across the sky like blessings. After the song ended, Alexander led her toward a small easel covered by a white cloth. What is this? She asked, curiosity soft in her tone. He pulled the cloth away, revealing a painting and oil portrait of the garden in full bloom, with her standing in the middle, holding a bouquet of lavender. "The Art of Elena Reed," he said quietly. "It is the first piece in our new Foundation's art gallery. I wanted the world to see what real strength looks like." She gasped softly, her hand flying to her mouth. "You did this?" "I commissioned it the week you left," he said. "I wanted to remember the woman who turned emptiness into beauty." Tears glistened in her eyes as she whispered, "You have no idea how much that means to me." "I think I do," he replied. He pulled her close, their foreheads touching as the wind carried the scent of roses and rain. "You once told me love cannot be built on lies," he murmured. "You were right. It has to be built on choice. And today I choose you, again and again." She smiled through her tears. "And I choose you." The world around them faded, leaving only the soft music of crickets and the glow of the garden lights. Their story had started as a contract, a cold transaction between two strangers. But it ended here, beneath the same sky that had once witnessed their mistakes, now witnessing their promise. Love, once forced by circumstance, had become their greatest truth. As Alexander kissed her hand, he whispered the words that closed every distance between them. "This is the best mistake we ever made."